Are we going to see a space war in our lifetime? No jokes. Yes, space war, if not the StarWar, is a real possibility. President Donald Trump of United States of America has announced formation of Space Force by the year 2020. China already has full-fledged Aerospace Force from 2014 onwards, and Russians operating a military space force since 2015. If the space war breaks out, life on Earth would be no less paralyzed. But where does India stand in space warfare? Hello and welcome. My name is Noreen and you are watching National Defense. I will tell you the secrets of real space warfare in this exclusive documentary by Shailesh Kumar. But first, may I ask you to subscribe to our military YouTube channel, National Defense, and yes, do press the bell icon to get notified for our new videos.
Very importantly, I'm hereby directing the Department of Defense and Pentagon to immediately begin the process necessary to establish a Space Force as the sixth branch of the armed forces. That's a big statement. We are going to have the Air Force and we are going to have the Space Force, separate but equal.
The Space Force will be sixth branch of US military after Army, Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps and Coast Guard, and will be separate but equal to US Air Force. The US military uses space-based technology for communications, command, control and navigation. Precision targeting and its reliance on satellite-guided weapons has increased with each new conflict. The development of advanced weapon systems like hypersonic glide vehicles, anti-satellite missiles, laser weapons and orbital weapons by adversaries cause unease in security establishment in America. The new intelligence reports of the secret space weapons of China and Russia literally forced Pentagon to put Space Force in place to safeguard American interests in space. But has the US belligerence caused a new arms race in space? US President Donald Trump believes space is already a war-fighting domain.
President Trump stated clearly and forcefully that space is, in his words, a war-fighting domain just like land and air and sea.
What were the secret space weapons of Russia and China which forced Donald Trump to announce the formation of potent Space Force? The Cold War era space weapons program, like orbital weapons, were terminated with enforcement of international treaties prohibiting weapons of mass destruction in space. But the contemporary space war actually started in the year 2007 when the world got awed by China's ASAT test. In the year 2007, China successfully targeted one of its own weather satellite, F-51C, using a kinetic kill vehicle from ASAT missile SC-19, launched from a mobile transporter erector launcher at Xi'an, proving they could destroy them as well as create a debris field that threatens other objects in orbit. Another launch of a suborbital rocket by China in 2013 worried US as intelligence reports suggested China having developed capability of attacking satellites in geostationary orbits too.
For many years, nations from Russia and China to North Korea and Iran have pursued weapons to jam, blind, and disable our navigation and communication satellites via electronic attacks from the ground. But recently, our adversaries have been working to bring new weapons of war into space itself. In 2007, China launched a missile that tracked and destroyed one of its own satellites, a highly provocative demonstration of China's growing capability to militarize space. Russia's been designing an airborne laser to disrupt our space-based system, and it claims to be developing missiles that can be launched from an aircraft mid-flight to destroy American satellites. Both China and Russia have been conducting highly sophisticated on-orbit activities that could enable them to maneuver their satellites into close proximity of ours, posing unprecedented new dangers to our space systems.
China announced formal establishment of Aerospace Force in 2014, military's fifth branch after the PLA, ground, air and naval, and the second artillery forces. It operates under an aerospace office under the Central Military Commission. A year later, Russia too formed Russian Space Forces. The mandate of Russian Space Forces include monitoring space objects and identification of potential threats to the Russian Federation in space and from space prevention of attacks as needed. Spacecraft launches and placing into orbit controlling satellite systems including integrated ones intended to be used for both military and civilian purposes in flight, and using separate ones towards providing the Russian Federation armed forces with the necessary information. Russian Space Force maintain both military and integrated satellite systems with launching installations and assets of control in the workable order and a number of other tasks.
Now the time has come to write the next great chapter in the history of our armed forces, to prepare for the next battlefield, where America's best and bravest will be called to deter and defeat a new generation of threats to our people, to our nation. The time has come to establish the United States Space Force.
Russia has jammed GPS reception in Ukraine. China has hacked US weather satellites. North Korea has jammed signals over the demilitarized zone. An adversarial attack in space would paralyze the country and even the whole world without satellites. There is no GPS. Cell phones wouldn't work. Banking systems would crash. The military would be paralyzed and the economy would crash. Interestingly, both China and Russia have capability to launch satellites that can change orbit and perform maneuvers like small aircrafts. Interestingly, secret spy and killer Russian satellite Cosmos 2491, Cosmos 2499, Cosmos 2504, launched in 2013, 14 and 15. Remained inactive for over a year, and then they could change their orbits with maneuverability of small aircrafts. US intelligence agencies intercepted China's secret plan to launch an attack on American GPS satellites in the event of a conflict. Attack on any of its satellites can jeopardize the security, economic and geostrategic interests of USA.
The space environment has fundamentally changed in the last generation. What was once peaceful and uncontested is now crowded and adversarial. Today, other nations are seeking to disrupt our space-based systems and challenge American supremacy in space as never before.
The report calls for the creation of the US Space Command, a new unified combatant command for space. This new command will establish unified command and control for our Space Force operations, ensure integration across the military and develop the space war fighting doctrine, tactics, techniques and procedures of the future. Second, the report calls for the establishment of a Space Operations Force. Third, the report calls for a new joint organization, the Space Development Agency, that will ensure the men and women of the Space Force having the cutting-edge war-fighting capabilities that they need and deserve. Finally, the report calls for clear lines of responsibility and accountability to manage the process of establishing and growing the Space Force, including the appointment of an Assistant Secretary for Defense for Space.
1 year ago, I revived the National Space Council and put exactly the right man in charge, and that's our friend, Mike Pence, who feels very strongly about this. And in December, I signed a historic directive that will return Americans to the moon for the first time since 1972, if you can believe that.
So now, the three countries, America, China and Russia, have Space Force. You have Army Base for Army, Air Force Base for Air Force, and Naval Base for Operating Navy. Space Force would mean there is going to be military bases in space. So the war in space would mean Earth to space, space to Earth, and space to space. Let's have a look at some of the space war weaponry. Russia and China are fast developing high-tech lasers and missiles that could blow American satellites out of the sky. Russia successfully flight tested its direct ascent anti-satellite missile known as PL-19, noodled 4 times latest on March 26, 2018 from a transporter erector launcher. Soviet Almaz secret military space station program was equipped with a fixed 23 mm autocannon to prevent hostile interception or boarding by hostile forces. The Soviet unmanned Paralyzed weapons platform was designed to be equipped with a megawatt carbon dioxide laser and a self-defense cannon. Both adversaries of USA, Russia, and China have developed hypersonic weapons which can even travel 5 to 10 times the speed of sound.
Both nations are also investing heavily in what are known as hypersonic missiles, designed to fly up to 5 miles per second at such low altitudes that they could potentially evade detection by our missile defense radars. In fact, China claimed to have made its first successful test of a hypersonic vehicle just last week.
Recently, Russia successfully test-fired its hypersonic Kinzhal missile that is capable of delivering both conventional and nuclear warhead at 2,000 km range with a speed of 10 Mach. The Kremlin's another hypersonic glide vehicle, dubbed Avangard, is designed to sit atop of the intercontinental ballistic missile. Once launched, it uses aerodynamical forces to sail on top of the atmosphere. American intelligence agencies intercepted Russia conducting weapon tests twice in 2016. Putin unveiled the invincible weapon, saying it travels 20 times the speed of sound and attacks like a meteoroid. US President Trump decided to launch SpaceWar by 2020 as US intelligence agencies reported Russia will be ready with at least 2 weapons out of 6 unveiled by Putin by 2020. China also has successfully test-fired its hypersonic vehicle Wave Rider that flew at a speed of 6 Mach.
China and Russia are also aggressively working to incorporate anti-satellite attacks into their warfighting doctrines. In 2015, China created a separate military enterprise to oversee and prioritize its warfighting capabilities in space. As their actions make clear, our adversaries have transformed space into a warfighting domain already, and the United States will not shrink from this challenge.
Russia's defense ministry has completed the construction of 2 radars for country's space forces and 4 storage facilities for Bulava sail-launch intercontinental ballistic missiles. The real worry of US is also how to deal with adversaries like China and Russia, which have developed laser weapons designed to damage space-based sensors, and they have capabilities to place these weapons into their space stations. In the scenario, even the missile defense system of USA will not be able to intercept these hypersonic weapons unless US has space-based assets to take these weapons down. The US Air Force, for the same reason, awarded 2 contracts for hypersonic weapons worth a maximum of $1.4 billion to aerospace giant Lockheed Martin. The first contract, announced in April, awards $928 million to develop something called Hypersonic Conventional Strike Weapons (HCSW), and last week the Air Force disclosed another deal worth up to $480 million to begin designing the Air-Launched Rapid Response Weapon (ARRW), the most dangerous space weapons ever. At one point, world was worried of orbital and suborbital weapons, as a nation could activate these nuclear warhead-tipped weapons floating in hibernation in space to attack any part of the world. Nations are also developing satellites that can retaliate any attack with laser or can fire in combat mode. India has been against the militarization of space all through these years and vouched for the peaceful use of space. But it does not mean India is not concerned for the security and defense of its space-based infrastructure. In 2010, the then Defense Minister A.K. Antony announced the formation of Integrated Space Cell for the security of its space-based assets. India's Integrated Space Cell operates under Integrated Defense Service Headquarters of Ministry of Defense. Thus, India has anti-satellite weapon. Reportedly, in 2012, the then DRDO chief Dr. V.K. Saraswat created repels by saying that India has all the building blocks in place to integrate an anti-satellite weapon to neutralize hostile satellites in low Earth and polar orbits. He reportedly suggested that India's anti-ballistic missile or ABM defense program could be utilized as an ASAT weapon along with Agni series of missiles. Besides, India is also reportedly running a hypersonic technology demonstration vehicle program and test-fired a hypersonic scramjet engine in a suborbital test flight in 2016. Today, if space warfare is being waged, then it won't be giant explosions lighting up the sky or X-wing fighters crashing to the ground. Instead, everyday conveniences that we take for granted would be disrupted, such as ATMs and streaming videos. But the world's most powerful military could be crippled if an enemy destroyed or disabled critical space infrastructure as part of a space war. Navigation-guided missiles and missile warning alerts rely on GPS satellites. Critical intelligence comes from spy satellites. Drones, navy ships, and infantry grunts use communication satellites. And the disruption of your mundane comforts, which increasingly rely on satellite communications, eventually could grind daily life to a halt. War happens to resolve a conflict. A nation inflicts damage to property and life of adversary to bring it to knees. Today, almost in all walks of life use space-based assets. Any damage to space assets can create havoc on Earth. Militaries, like of big nations, dependent on space-based assets for defense and intelligence.
And that new defense budget included new resources for 2 cutting-edge military communication satellites and nearly $1 billion for our space defense programs. And today, we renew the President's call on the Congress of the United States to invest an additional $8 billion in our space security systems over the next 5 years.
The space economy reportedly stands at $350 billion at the moment and is likely to grow to $1 trillion by the year 2040. We rely on GPS signals for navigation, communication, banking, agriculture, travel, and the internet itself. It's estimated that 6 to 7% of GDP in Western countries depends on satellite navigation. Communications satellites are applied not just for direct broadcast television, but also to enable many terrestrial networks. In remote areas of the world, there may be the only means of communication. In near future, communication satellites could provide the whole world with broadband internet.
The men and women of this department have also taken historic steps to secure American leadership in space. At the direction of Secretary Mattis, the Department of Defense is fielding a new generation of jam-resistant GPS and communication satellites, and new missile warning satellites that are smaller, tougher, and more maneuverable than ever before. And while these steps have been vital to our national defense, they are really only a beginning. They're only a beginning of meeting the rising security threats our nation faces in space today and in the future.
There are only 5 global treaties specific to space. Chief among them is the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, but if only one of its provisions, Article 4, directly deals with military activity, it prohibits the placement of weapons of mass destruction in space. Other means and methods of destroying or interfering with a satellite are not prohibited, although other areas of law, like the laws of armed conflict, regulate their use. This includes things such as anti-satellite missiles, directed energy weapons including lasers, electronic warfare, cyber warfare, and dual-use technology such as on-orbit servicing mechanic satellites. Article 4 of Outer Space Treaty reads, States parties to the treaty undertake not to place in orbit around the Earth any objects carrying nuclear weapons or any other kinds of weapons of mass destruction, install such weapons on celestial bodies or station such weapons in outer space in any other manner. The moon and the other celestial bodies shall be used by all states parties to the treaty exclusively for peaceful purposes. The establishment of military bases, installations and fortifications, the testing of any type of weapons and the conduct of military maneuvers on celestial bodies shall be forbidden. The use of military personnel for scientific research or for any other peaceful purposes shall not be prohibited. The use of any equipment or facility necessary for peaceful exploration of the moon and other celestial bodies shall also not be prohibited.
But it's also about jobs and the economy. This is a great thing we're doing. This time we will do more than plant our flag and leave our footprints. We will establish a long-term presence, expand our economy, and build the foundation for an eventual mission to Mars, which is actually going to happen very quickly.
As President Trump has said, in his words, it is not enough to merely have an American presence in space. We must have American dominance in space, and so we will. America will always seek peace in space as on the Earth, but history proves that peace only comes through strength. And in the realm of outer space, the United States Space Force will be that strength in the years ahead.
We leave it to you if the decisions of few countries to militarize the space is good. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, do share the video and subscribe National Defense. Thank you. Keep watching National Defense. Jai Hind.